Let's talk about the Third Legion, the most perfect of the Emperor's creations, at least in their eyes. The Emperor's children definitely have their share of issues, and I'm not exactly their biggest fan as they stand in the modern day of the setting. But pre-heresy, they were my favourite of the original legions, and they are also, in my opinion, the legion that fell the furthest from what they were. They were the only of the 20 original legions permitted to bear the Emperor's name and symbol, the Palatine Aquila, that was personally granted to them as a symbol of their martial perfection. They were the embodiment of what the Emperor had intended the Legiones Astartes to be. Noble in action and aspect, excelling in all matters, strong, civilised, firm of purpose, and loyal to the core. So what caused them to descend from this height to the scattered warbands consumed by their own desires that we see in the 41st millennium? That's what we will cover in this video. Although we will start at the beginning, with the Emperor's children before they were reunited with their Primarch Fulgrim. The Third Legion was formed during the latter days of the Unification Wars on Terra, with many of its warriors drawn from the noble court of the continent of Europa. Some Imperial scholars believe that this is what gave the Legion its name, although the evidence for this is limited. In the early days of the Great Crusade, the Third Legion operated somewhat differently to the other first founding legions, who were often deployed en masse as unified commands to serve as independent shock troops. The Third Legion, however, was used to support, coordinate, and lead the lesser troops of the Imperial Army. They had an almost unique ability to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the diverse regiments of the Imperial Army, and drew on the traditions of the aristocracies they hailed from in order to command them. The Emperor's children were granted the right to bear the Palatine Aquila after the Proximan betrayal, when the Legion's 16th cohort fought and died to the last man during the insurrectionist surprise attack on the Imperial Compliance Ceremony. This sacrifice allowed the wounded Emperor, who had been injured by a vortex weapon, time to recover and fight his way clear of the ambush. In recognition of this, the Legion were given the standard of the Palatine Aquila that the cohort had fought to protect, to keep as a relic, along with the right to end the rebellion by exterminatus, repaying the blood debt that was owed them. However, less than a year after this triumph, the Legion suffered the catastrophic loss of nearly their entire gene seed stock, forever altering their future. As the Gene Forges of Luna began to implant recruits for all of the spacemarine legions, a portion of the Third Legion's gene seed reserve was dispatched to Luna for establishment, but it never arrived. This loss was a severe blow to the Legion's development, however it should have been possible to implant new warriors with the emergency gene seed reserve on Terra. Unfortunately, a viral blight had suddenly infected several of these vaults, and the entire stock of the Third Legion's gene seed was destroyed. Because they had not yet been reunited with their Primarch, this was almost a death sentence for the Legion, as the only way that they could replace their losses was from the progenoid glands of the dead, and this was a far from foolproof procedure that led to the Legion's strength dwindling with every battle. This all changed when the Primarch Fulgrim was discovered on the planet of Chemos. Like most of the planets that the Primarchs were stranded on, Chemos was an absolute shithole. It was surrounded by a dust cloud, so it was constantly in twilight, and everyone on the planet was forced to work in fortress factories, with no time for recreation. Upon his discovery on the planet, Fulgrim worked to remedy this, increasing the efficiency of the many systems, organisations and factions that ran the factories, which in turn allowed for the population of Chemos to spend less time working and more time on art and culture. Fun fact, Fulgrim was, as far as we know, the only Primarch to have ever married, as he had multiple political marriages during his unification of Chemos, and though he outlived them all, he did seem to genuinely love them. When the Emperor came to Chemos, Fulgrim was reunited with his legion, or at least what was left of his legion, as he was met with only 200 warriors. Upon learning of their history, Fulgrim became consumed by the idea that both he and his warriors had to live up to the honours bestowed upon his legion by becoming paragons of the perfection of the Emperor. This obsession would ultimately doom the Legion to become what they are in the 41st millennium. As they were too few to undertake the Great Crusade alone, Fulgrim and his warriors spent a decade fighting alongside Horus Lupercal and the Lunar Wolves. Though the Primarchs and their legions were unalike, they complemented each other well and soon grew close. By the time the Emperor's children had recovered their numbers enough to fight alone, they had become oath brothers to the Lunar Wolves. This was yet another unfortunate event that would eventually lead to the proud Legion's fall to chaos. Though these events would ultimately contribute to Fulgrim's fall, his fate was truly sealed on the world of Laren, a planet inhabited by twisted Xenos worshippers of the chaos god of seduction and pleasure, Slaanesh. During the campaign, the chief apothecary of the Third Legion, Fabius Bile, discovered that the lair creatures had engaged in extensive genetic modification in order to pursue perfection, and suggested to Fulgrim that perhaps by studying it he could further improve the Astartes as warriors. Despite this going against the tenets of the Imperial truth, Fulgrim's desire for perfection led to him agreeing with Bile and giving him free rein to do as he wished, leading to the first of the genetically modified cacophony, or noise marines. As the campaign progressed, the Emperor's children discovered a great temple dedicated to Slaanesh at the centre of the Laren civilization. The Imperial troops, at this time ignorant of the existence of the ruinous powers, did not realise the significance of what they had found, leading to the doom of all who stepped inside the temple. At the centre of the chamber was a circular block of stone, and embedded within was a tall, slender, silver sword that contained within it a greater demon of Slaanesh. Once Fulgrim had claimed the sword, the demon began whispering in his mind and corrupting him towards the service of Slaanesh. He began to wield the blade more often than his prior weapon, the sword Fireblade that had been forged during a competition with Fulgrim's most favoured brother, Ferrus Manus. Thinking that the whispers of the demon were simply his own subconscious, Fulgrim increasingly listened and gave in to what they suggested. At the outbreak of the Horus heresy, the corrupted Fulgrim would ultimately side with his brother Horus, shortly after the Eldari Farseer Eldrad Ulthran had attempted to warn him of the treachery. This meeting went downhill fast after Eldrad realised that Fulgrim was using a Slaaneshi blade, and led to Fulgrim slaying both a Wraithlord and an Avatar of Cain. Following this, Fulgrim would seek out Horus to discover the truth, but he was swayed to the Warmaster's side and to the service of the ruinous powers, the only beings that he believed could provide him with the perfection he so craved. Following this, Fulgrim was sent by Horus to attempt to bring Ferrus Manus over to their side. Fulgrim hoped that by relying on their bonds of friendship and brotherhood, he could convince Ferrus of the righteousness of Horus's cause, a hope that proved disastrously wrong. The meeting, in an echo of the one with the Eldari, ended in violence as Ferrus was determined to stop Fulgrim's betrayal of the Emperor before it could begin, using his necrodermis-coated hands to destroy the sword Fireblade, but knocking himself out in the process. Fulgrim could not bring himself to kill his brother and escaped, taking Ferrus's hammer Forgebreaker with him and beheading all of Ferrus's honour guard. The next time the brothers would meet was during the Dropsite massacre on Istan V, when the traitor legions ambushed the loyalist salamanders, Ravenguard and Ironhands. At the end of this battle, Fulgrim and Ferrus fought a final duel, both using the other's favoured weapon. Fulgrim ultimately won, beheading his brother, and it was this that shocked Fulgrim into thinking clearly about what he had done since his expedition to Laren, and he was horrified by the many betrayals that had led to Astartes fighting Astartes and brother killing brother. Overcome by grief, he succumbed to the greater demon inside his sword, which then fully possessed Fulgrim's body, locking the real Fulgrim's consciousness away within a painting of him that stood in the centre of the Legion's flagship, the Pride of the Emperor. Eventually, Fulgrim did manage to reclaim his body before becoming reborn as a demon prince of Slaanesh, which very recently got a fittingly disgusting model on the tabletop. Ascending to demon princehood meant giving up his soul. This will be important later, by the way, I hope you're taking notes. By the time of the Siege of Terra, all trace of honour, decency, or even basic military discipline had vanished amongst the Emperor's children. While the other traitor legions continued to assault the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's children embarked upon a spree of murder and amoral self-gratification amongst the helpless citizenry of the rest of Terra. Even during their participation in the battle to take the Imperial Palace, they rarely engaged tactically, preferring to launch attacks designed solely to capture prisoners they could abuse for their own amusement. And that is how the Emperor's children have continued into the modern day. Once a proud legion focused on martial mastery, they are now split up into several disparate, squabbling warbands without their Primarch to lead them, as Fulgrim now spends most of his time on the planet of Kallax, overseeing debased extremes of sensation and experience. However, there is still hope for redemption. Fabius Bile, the old chief apothecary, survived into the 41st millennium and began creating clones of the Primarchs, including Fulgrim. These clones were not on the same level as the true Primarchs, as Primarchs are essentially extremely powerful warp entities crammed into meat suits. Bile could make the meat suits, but lacked the capability to imbue them with the souls of the true Primarchs. The one exception to this was one clone of Fulgrim, that seemed to contain portions of the Primarch's true soul. How this happened is unknown, but I personally enjoy the theory that ascending to demonhood led to the good parts of Fulgrim's soul fleeing into the warp, before they found the clone. However it happened, the result was the same. The clone contained the worldview and morals of pre-Lairblade Fulgrim, essentially making it a pre-heresy loyalist Fulgrim. Unfortunately, Bile sold this clone to the Xenos Museum creator, Trazyn the Infinite, so it isn't exactly roaming free in the modern day. But I personally will forever hold out hope that we get a loyalist Emperor's Children army and Primarch eventually, as unlikely as that is. And that is the Emperor's Children, their history, fall, and potential future. Sorry this video took so long to get out, I've been consistently sidetracked by different projects while making this. Many thanks for your patience. Like, subscribe, all the rest, and I'll see you in the next video.